Welcome back to their episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan, joined as always by my friend, the founder and CEO of startups.com, Wil Schroter. Wil, we've had very, very interesting relationships with our startups, with our work over the years. It's necessarily what I would call healthy. We poured a lot of time and love into them, and sometimes they've given back to us, but I don't think we've ever really truly demanded much back from our startups. But that's not necessarily true for everybody else. And so I think we got to talk about like the difference between being a founder and how to balance some of that stuff out and kind of what it looks like for the rest of the world. For example, you ever called a friend at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday to find them floating in a pool and just found yourself incredulous?
I remember I told you the story after it happened. This was like a year ago, and I'm driving home. Actually, it's funny. I was driving home after teaching the entrepreneurship class at my kid's school, and I was calling a friend of mine because he was kind of like en route to where I was headed next. And it was 2:00 on Tuesday, a beautiful like summer afternoon or spring afternoon. And I'm like, hey man, what are you up to? He's a senior executive at a public technology company, right? And he's a sales executive, right? His whole life, he has been on the ground selling. Right? Like he understands performance metrics better than anybody.
Well, except when he's in the water, not
okay,
selling.
So he's also one of my oldest friends. And so I was like, hey man, what are you doing? And he said, I'm in the pool. I'm like, huh? Like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, I'm sitting in a floating in my pool. I'm like, and this is what's so funny, right? I was like, how? I was incredulous. Like, how could you possibly at 2:00 on a Tuesday,
right,
when there's work to be done?
Yeah, there's work to be done. Lives depend on you, sir.
And so my first thought was to fire him. My second thought was that he doesn't work for me.
It doesn't work for me. Yeah, I can't. Just go throw him a cinder block in the pool.
But here's the best part. Like, and again, I've got a great relationship with him. I've known him for a long time. My response was kind of like, how? Like, how could you possibly do that? And this is all he said. He goes, makes me happy.
Makes me happy. Like,
and
just thanks for making it worse. Right now, I really don't understand.
I was like, that's the worst answer ever. Right. And again, I'm telling this story to set the premise here of what a toxic relationship with work looks like. And we're not talking about his. We're talking about mine, right? Like, it didn't occur to me, like at first blush, again, I'm not that like one-dimensional, but it didn't occur to me that you could just do that. That you could just be sitting on a Tuesday in the middle of the work week in your pool because it made you feel good. Yeah. I was like, there's got to be some business purpose to what's going on, right? And that's where our story begins.
We dig deep enough into it, you can find that, right? Like, I think as founders, we often conflate hustle with value. And, we think if we're not chained to our laptop 24/7, we're slacking. And not the kind of slack where we're talking to the rest of our team, not that slack, like just the not doing anything kind of slacking. Guess what? Like, productivity can be floating in a pool at 2 p.m. if it recharges your brain, if it gives you the energy you need to go back in and do the things, right? Like, we know what the cost of burnout is. This is the cost of the therapy that keeps us from getting there, I suppose.
Yeah. And, one of the things we do a lot of on this podcast, 300 episodes. I mean, like, we've
almost, man. This is like 297 or 8 or something.
Oh, damn. I didn't even realize it was that close.
We're real close.
I rounded up for charity. When I think about, all the topics we've covered, and some folks know this because some folks that listen know us, most of what we talk about here is a reflection of our own journeys. This is Ryan and I in our own therapy. The startup therapy we're generally talking about is ours. Right? So, and a lot of people will comment, they'll say like, hey, it just sounds like I'm in the middle of a conversation of two people like unpacking something between them. It's because you are. That's actually what's happening.
Do you remember back, like this is 2017, 18, somewhere in there, where we were like, we should do a podcast. And then we were like, what should we talk about? And we went through all kinds of iterations, like Startup Daily. We could cover some news. We could do all this different stuff. And then finally we're like, what about those conversations we have every week anyways, where we're just talking about like, what are you going through? What are you going through? How are you dealing with it? What have you been through? And we're like, what if we just hit record?
Yep.
And then we did. And so here we are. So to your point, it is very much just listening in on the conversations of two people who live through this stuff daily.
And the irony is, if you listen to this long enough, you're like, man, those guys really need therapy. Which is totally true.
Not anymore.
But, exactly.
On a weekly basis.
I say this to set the tone, to say a lot of this isn't us talking down to founders saying, here's what you're doing wrong. This is in real time saying, this is what we're doing wrong. Like right now, right? And the self-awareness of it, of being able to say, hey, something's broken, doesn't make it go away. I want to start there. For me, I'll just kind of point to myself here. I've spent the last 31 years in a very specific kind of mindset, which is if I'm working, I'm valuable and okay. And if I'm not working, I'm guilty and not. Now, that is wildly unhealthy. I just want to be clear, right? Wildly unhealthy. Pays well, but it's wildly unhealthy.
You said this before, but it was fear motivation,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And it's about safety, right? So
Yep.
for you, it's like if I'm working, I don't have to be afraid because it creates safety for me, right? So as long as I'm working, I'm
100%.
safe.
100%.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot to deal with.
It is.
Right? It's a hell of a lot to unpack.
I think what we build up with that is a tolerance for discomfort.
Oh
Right.
yeah,
In so many ways. So, in the way my buddy is floating in a pool and he's saying, hey, I am not comfortable at work right this minute. I'm going to go do something comfortable. My response to not enough comfort is work more because that will somehow create more comfort. And sometimes it does. Right. But I guess what I'm saying is if we zoom out as founders and we say, hey, is my relationship with my startup healthy? Ergo,
sure.
does it pay me back in more ways than cash as much as I put into it?
For everybody listening, like I'd say 99% of you can listen to this and me just say, probably not. Yeah, there are going to be a few of you who are like, no, I actually have a very, very healthy relationship with this. Yeah, most of us don't.
And for those of you that do, please create a podcast. Ryan and I would love to listen to it and take
Yeah, I'd
notes and
love
follow
to.
along
Just
and do what
send
you
me a
do.
note that tells me I'm wrong. That'd be great.
But for kind of everybody else, I think part of it is because when we go into this, Ryan, like when we start something, you start something from nothing. There's a voluminous amount of weight and work and commitment, discomfort and frustration. I think because we come to expect that, it builds a pattern behavior where we just assume that's how it always has to be. It's essentially starting in an abusive relationship and using the abuse as the baseline for how the relationship works. That's how it functions.
Yeah, I think, and again, look, there's reasons for all this, right? Part of it is that when we breathe life into something new, that's it. We're literally breathing life into it. Without us, there isn't anything. At the idea stage, even at the early operational stages, without us, it doesn't do anything. It's as if we're constantly having to give the business CPR, and if we stop, we know exactly what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
There comes a point at which that's no longer necessary. But man, the muscle memory is built at that point, and we've wrapped our entire being up in being the thing that keeps it alive. And then it's just a matter of momentum and being able to recognize that momentum and going like, okay, it actually can survive without me. But man, that's a tough moment to spot.
Part of it too is it's all consuming. There is no startup that won't just consume all of you if you let it, right? It is endlessly hungry. If I decide to spend 16 hours straight today at my computer, at my desk, working, the startup will consume all of it. The startup will never tell me, hey, it's time to go home. The startup will never tell me, hey, you're pretty tired. You should probably go get some rest, right? The startup will never tell me, do you know you're developing a terminal disease?
Yeah.
Like, because of this, right? Like none of that will ever happen. The startup will consume as much as we give it. And that's where the danger begins because we start to believe that because it can consume all of our time, it should consume all of our time.
Exactly
right?
that.
And it took me a long time to start to understand that balance. Ryan, you said something earlier when we were talking today about how you and I both hit the same kind of milestone in starting families.
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden something greater than us became that voice. What was it like for you?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like I think you said something that ties directly to this, which was we have a high tolerance for this kind of thing. Like we have a high tolerance for deferring happiness, for deferring joy, for deferring time on ourselves, and just accumulating maladies of physical and mental and emotional states and foregoing relationships, doing all this other stuff. But at some point, when we became partners to wives and fathers to children, all of a sudden, I have 4 other people's tolerances to consider. Are they as tolerant of my ability to just sit at this desk and pour myself into a monitor for 18, 19 hours a day? The answer is no, they're not. Right. At the point at which I realized it was costing them. And there are times where, like yesterday, right? Yesterday, I took off at like 2 p.m. my time for a couple hours to go pick up my daughters, take them to a soccer match, watch them play, and then get them back to school. And then I came back to the house and continued working. At some points in the past, I think I still didn't really realize what all the costs of that were. I was like, you think about the fact that, like, I don't know, whether you miss it or they're going to miss it, and whether it's either guilt or just a fear of missing out or a combination of the two, kind of doesn't matter. But over time, I've started to pay more attention to the fact that, like, it costs them something when I don't do that. Right. And so,
and you don't get it back.
You don't get it back. It back. And so I think being able to make those trade-offs, right? And I think that, it's interesting, but you said something else that ties directly to this, which is that it's really hard for us to see those things, we will just continue to go and push and do, and we don't necessarily notice in our own lives what you had. So that we have to look outside, right? So whether it's your family or not, or you call a friend and find them floating in a pool at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, the fact that we can't relate to someone else enjoying their lives just for the sake of that, probably our problem, not theirs.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And again,
and we need those lenses.
Even while it was happening, I said to my friend, again, he's known me for a very long time and he's a good sounding board. And I said, I'm laughing about this because I know how ridiculous it is that I have a problem with it. And I said to him, I was like, if it were me, I would be firing you right now on the phone. And I was like, but at the same time, I also know you're right. Right. Which is even harder. And I think part of this is getting to a point where we stop and take stock of what our values are, like what's important to us, just like you said with your daughter. And you say, these are my non-negotiables, right? These are the things that if the startup takes these, it's not okay anymore. It's not. A lack of having those things really laid out in very big, bold letters. You and I have talked about this on previous episodes where we sat down early in the process of building this company and said, these are our non-negotiables. And to our credit,
won't work with jerks, right?
We won't work with jerks, right?
Yep.
And when we get to Jerky Town with someone, we're like, never been worth it. Never been worth it. And every single time we were like 10% sure that this might be a good decision, it was always 100% a good decision.
Yeah. Right? Hindsight, it was always like, yep. And the only thing we ever questioned was why not sooner?
Why not sooner, right? And to be fair, those very same people go home and they're like, those guys are jerks. Yep. By the way, they're also right. Not because I think we're jerks, Ryan, but because, they look at it, especially if you're being let go, as how dare them, et cetera.
Right. I was performing, even though I was a jerk.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
listen,
why would they should have tolerated it.
Again. And that's one of them. Another one is, and you touched on this, our ability to be able to say, what's my commitment to, let's say, my family? Mm-hmm. And at what point have I given too much? Or could I give too much? And the fact that you can look at the soccer game and say, hey, I get that I could avoid this. I could not go. And the world wouldn't end. However, this is also one of the things that draws the line as to what my values are. And if I don't go, and again, it would be different, Ryan, if we were right in the middle of closing some major deal and there was some you're creating a whole other consequence. But fortunately, we're not in that position where we have some kind of consequence. But I think for me, I have this overarching consequence of success, of responsibility, things like that I can easily let trump everything. That excuse can easily apply to 16 hours of my day. I have to forcibly talk myself out of that excuse for every minute I don't spend with that excuse, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it's exactly the same for me. It's the calculation is always in that order. My default is be here for a lot of hours and do as much as I can or more than I can and just keep doing. And you have to talk yourself out of it. I think where it came down to, you talked about some non-negotiables. For me, I've got a couple, one that's just super personal is sleep. I don't mess with it anymore, right? I try not to. My system's been messing with itself for the last couple of weeks, but I try not to mess with sleep. Sleep is so important because I'm way better all day when I have the right sleep. The other one, and this is something that I think I've been doing a fairly good job of for a couple of years now, but I just read something a few weeks ago that reinforced it from a childhood psychologist that said, your kids need you on their time and their terms, right? You can't say, oh, you want to talk about that? Well, I'm busy right now. We'll talk about it later. It doesn't work, right? There's a real cost to them in so many ways because the fact that it was important then is why it's important. And so I've really tried to do that and just say look, I can run to catch up on work. I'll bend my sleep, right? If I have to, right? I will sacrifice that personally so that they're not forced to sacrifice something during their, important years of personal development. I've taken it a step further where I've applied it to my wife as well. Right? If she needs something, she gets it then. Right? My kids need something, they get it then. The way I analogize it to myself, because for me, the going back to my early soccer days always helps. And I said, you know what? It's like having to run out of position to cover somebody else, right? It's the right thing to do in the moment. Now, I know I'll have to run extra hard to get back to my position to make sure that I'm not letting somebody else down. But if I got to go cover somebody's spot, I got to get over there because the cost and the consequence of that is immediate. The cost and consequence of me being out of position is something that happens later, and I can do my best to deal with it, right? And I think that as startup founders, we're pretty good at being able to run fast to catch up.
Something that's really funny about everything we talk about here is that none of it is new. Everything you're dealing with right now has been done 1,000 times before you, which means the answer already exists, you may just not know it, but that's okay. That's kind of what we're here to do. We talk about this stuff on the show, but we actually solve these problems all day long at groups.startups.com. So if any of this sounds familiar, stop guessing about what to do. Let us just give you the answers to the test and be done with it. There is no point within my work week, the Monday through Friday, where I ever feel like I am justified for not working. And I'm not comparing this to yours. What I'm saying is, it's one of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about. And let me give you some also how I mitigate that. One of the things I do, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, is I'm hyper specific about what needs to get done today. Because if I don't say, here's the one thing that needs to get done today, I always start with one, because if I don't get one done, it doesn't matter if I have two. But here's the one thing I have to get done. And let's say I motor through that, went faster than I expected it to, and I got 2 and 3 done. Cool. Now I know that I can just keep adding more shit to the list. That's just the nature. The list never ends, right? The only way I've been able to kind of like, quote, free myself from guilt is by accomplishing things. If I knew I accomplished something, it kind of took some of the mental, like the guilt off me. But if I think that I'm not accomplishing something, work could be getting done and I'm not doing it, I'm not in a great place, right? I'm just not. No. And I don't love that.
I think that the way it's worked for me is that instead of feeling like down in guilt, it fires me up to like be super productive when I get back to it. Right. Yeah. And a lot of times, like when I was driving to pick up the kids yesterday, right, it's a 15-minute drive over to where I had to grab them. So on the way over there, I was doing voice notes on the ad copy that I was going to write when I got back, because that's what I paused to go do that. Right. Had some ads I wanted to get out. And I said, all right, I'm going to go do this thing instead. Spent that time, get myself fired up. Okay, so then when I get back, I've got the core what I need, right? And it's not like we're never really off, right? It's so hard to completely switch off. I'm car by myself. I've got some time, and so for me, what I've been trying to do is just use that as the motivation, right? That instead of letting that feeling just kind of like sour within me, trying to use it as a little bit of fuel to say, okay, I'm going to go do this, and I'm grateful that I can go do this thing with my kids. I'm going to use that gratitude and the fact that I am a little anxious about not being at my desk to do this right now to elevate the work when I get back to it. And I think I like that. Seems to be working.
I also think that if we look at kind of the ROI, if you will, that our startups provide for us, the obvious one is profit. But the reason that's a tough one to always align to is because most of us won't get to a profitable startup anytime soon. What ends up happening is we're like, once we get to profit, once we make a lot of money, then we'll be happy. And that's a bit of an elusive goal, but we'll save that for another podcast. But because the startup is perpetually not as successful as we want it to be, we always feel like all other costs or commitments are justified until we get to that threshold. Okay. What we lose when we're using that kind of math, that like it's just numeric $ math, profit equals success equals happiness, is that we can use that as an escape to make ourselves miserable along the way. It's basically saying, hey, we just keep extending the finish line, but the race is so grueling and so awful that even if we cross the finish line, it won't have mattered. We'll be dead by then. It's dangerous when we don't see the other types of ROI we need to be extracting from the startup.
For you, when you think about those other types of ROI, where would you, and clearly, like, we have to be performing within the startups, right? It doesn't work otherwise. But I think the misnomer for me has always been that, like, there were these points, right? You said it, like, there's milestones we hit where all of a sudden then it'll be okay. I've been in positions where I loved my revenue numbers and I hated my life, right? So it isn't necessarily correlated. There's also been times where, like, I've loved my life and just made peace with the fact that revenue wasn't where I wanted, but hating my life and designing a life that I hated wasn't going to help me hit revenue numbers, right? Growth on paper means nothing if it's fueling misery. And so we've got to find some kind of balance from that. But for you, what would be the right after the startup metrics? Like, what's the next one that matters to you most?
I think part of it is working on something that I care about, right? That's been probably maybe the number one ROI at startups.com for me. And I'm guessing maybe for you, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I love who I work for, being the startups, and I love the value of what we provide. Now, to be fair, if I wanted to optimize just for income, I'd probably go work at a public company, right? And climb the ranks and be manager guy. I would be miserable, right? I'm sure of it. I would be miserable, but I could make more money doing that. However, and this
Yeah.
goes back to the ROI, I wouldn't get any ROI. I'd have more money in the bank, but be less happy. And if money is a conduit partially to happiness, right? Then I would actually be short circuiting that because I'd be getting the money, but not any of the happiness. And so when I look at startups I've built in the past, not that I didn't like them, but they had no emotional ROI. When I ran an ad agency, like the work was kind of interesting, but I didn't jump out of bed in the morning being like, I can't wait to help Best Buy sell more digital cameras, right? I don't care. Whereas with what we do, like later on today, we're going to get on the phone. I've got a bunch of office hours calls with a bunch of founders, and I'm going to help them work through tons of problems. And I love that. And to be fair, their gratitude is phenomenal, right? They're like, man, I didn't even see that, or you've helped me through a really tough time period. Ryan, we get this from a lot of people that listen to the show, right?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, we hear that kind of feedback all the time. We get it from our office hours. I get the same thing from the workshops I do on Mondays and Fridays around getting customers. It just always feels amazing, right? And those kind of things truly are. I think I said this a couple of weeks ago in the team Slack. I was saying that like those are the moments that pump me up. Like I was heads down and grinding. I was trying to find a smoking gun around a problem I was having within HubSpot. Couldn't find it, and it was driving me crazy. And it could have completely changed my week. And instead, I was like, I get so fired up by those things that we get to do, those interactions that we have with the startup founders, that at that point, like it fills you up, right? And if your startup is constantly leaving you feeling hollow, then any returns that you're generating as a result of that kind of get couched as losses in my book, man, because emotional bankruptcy is a real thing. Like it's a very real thing. And I'd say that it is almost always hand in hand with burnout for me, or maybe even the precursor cause for the burnout. Like you and I both have incredible motives. We can just keep working. That's not the problem, right?
Right.
When the work no longer rewards intrinsically, not extrinsically, then I think it starts to fall really flat for me.
I agree. I also think, and this is minor, I don't think you and I have talked about this much, but I think just the way we've designed our business, nothing to do with the industry we're in or anything else like that. I mean, the actual business that we run, we're very hands-off with the team, right? A team has a phenomenal level of autonomy. And for me, that's a reflection because I don't want to be up in people's business all day, right? That brings me no pleasure whatsoever. In fact, the more I have to do it, the more miserable I am. But I think it's a flip side from a culture standpoint. The folks that work with us enjoy a phenomenal level of autonomy. We also know that it doesn't always work, right? There are some people that look at it as autonomy as time in the pool, right? I'm kidding, but like, yeah. And there's some people who look at autonomy and say, I can't wait to do great work, and I'm going to do it on a schedule that works great for me. And we have plenty of those people here that can do that. But what I'm saying is, from kind of how we've designed this company and how it's evolved, I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of that level of autonomy. I'm really proud that we have a culture that supports that. Because, Ryan, if we had a different version, okay, where in our culture, it was all about hierarchy, it was about 360-degree reviews, it was about basically micromanagement, et cetera.
I'm getting
nauseous. I wouldn't want to work at that company.
Topic?
Yeah. I wouldn't want to work at that company, right?
Leadership, great. Management,
not
yuck,
so much.
Right?
Yeah,
it's the worst. It's the worst.
There's a time and a place for it. I totally respect it. I'm not saying management is awful. I'm saying I just don't enjoy it, right? I just don't enjoy it at that level. I want to work with people who have autonomy. I want to work with people that are self-motivated. Again, that doesn't always work. I would say more often than not, it doesn't work. As an example, we're tensioning a little bit, but like we don't do personnel reviews. We've never done them. There's been no 360-degree review. There's been nothing. Right. And my take on that, again, this is all about building something that like works for you. My take on that is if I can't manage the person day to day with expectations and I have to wait a year to tell them they're not doing a good job, what the hell am I doing?
Right. Yeah.
And if the person I'm working with has no idea how well they're doing, I'm like, I'm really bad at my job. Now, maybe it's me just being lazy, but I found that the people who work really well work just fine in that environment. And the people that don't. But my point is, those things don't make me happy. And so I've generally said, okay, let's build a system that works for us where we don't have to do those things. And I think it's powerful.
It is. And look, I think those are some of the best decisions we've made. And, they don't show up directly on a P&L. Clearly, I think that they do impact it, but they're not the kind of things where it just shows directly on a P&L, but they keep us energized, they keep us happy, they keep us creative. And that matters a lot, right? You can't deposit happiness in a bank, I suppose, but you can't buy your sanity back with money either. So we got to be careful of what we're trading at any given point.
Here's a different way I'd phrase it. Money makes me safe, but the work I do and how I spend my time makes me happy.
Can.
Yeah, I'm saying,
right. Like
in
I
this
think
case,
that's the important part.
in this case, it does. And let me build on that. I've spent way too much time thinking about the things that make me happy, the activities that make me happy. Fun fact, they generally don't cost anything, right? The things that I enjoy doing, I enjoy playing hockey, I enjoy spending time with my family, I enjoy building stuff, whatever. They generally don't cost much. I'm building a house now that does cost money, but that's just incidental. I could be working on anything else as a project, like that wouldn't necessarily have that cost associated with it. And so, again, I look at money not as if I have more, my happiness is going to go up, but if I have left, my safety is going to go down. So I look at that as kind of like my baseline. In the formative years of my life, before I was an adult, I was poor. And I wasn't unhappy, but I was very unsafe. And I can tell you from that experience, it's very hard to be consistently happy while being unsafe. Those two things, there are a correlation. They're different, but they're correlated.
They're diametrically opposed, right? Like I wouldn't say it's difficult. It's got to be nearly impossible. If you're not safe, how can you be happy?
Conversely, though, if you are safe, you're financially well off, it also doesn't guarantee happiness. It doesn't work the other way. It does not. It's something I always say is money may not buy you happiness, but you're rarely happier without it.
I think what it comes down to is figuring out what that actual threshold for safety is. Like at some point, if you just keep chasing more and more and more and more safety, like what are you building safety against, right? It's the difference between, having batteries in a flashlight and building a bunker in your backyard.
Right.
They're both derive some level of safety. And then you got to decide how much safety do I actually need? And I think that's where we can get it wrong. And maybe we don't take our foot off the safety gas pedal soon enough and start to apply some effort to happiness, because, for years we're measuring our success by how much discomfort we can tolerate, right? Like I'm willing to be here and I'm going to grind, I'm going to build, I'm going to do. And then we wonder why we're desperate to exit a business, right? Like you and I both were around the early agencies where it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. Please, someone take it off my hands. And so, I think it comes down to just picking that point and saying like, this is safe enough. And now I can start to focus on bringing some joy into this equation.
But stick with that. I think it's important at the very least, for us to get like a milestone that says, hey, the business isn't where I want it to be yet. That's usually the case. Okay. I get that. But that's not a perennial excuse for me to allow it to make me miserable all the time. Because if I agree that it's okay for the business to make me miserable, and this has nothing to do with whether you're willing to sacrifice. There's always a sacrifice to be had. There's no deliberate stopping point in sacrifice. This goes back to the business being all consuming. And for decades, not even years, for decades, I didn't appreciate that threshold. I thought wrongly that there was something on the other side that would automatically tell me I don't have to behave like this anymore. And there wasn't. I mean, one of the things when I talk to people who are substantially successful and they have bigger enterprises now, is they're like, I have way more mouths to feed now, right? Like my problems are much bigger now. Like my pressure has gone way up. And I'm like, damn, not only have you not gotten over the threshold, you made it higher, right? That's scary.
I think it goes back to something you said at the very beginning, which is like the abusive relationship model, where then you just start to build on that. And you just continue to build more of that abuse into what you're doing, right? At some point, like all you're doing is creating more obligation to grind. Right. And I think that one of the things for me, and this speaks to the fact, like you said, we built a team that we love being with, and we don't have to manage. We've built clients that we love hanging out with and can drive amazing results for. But I see so many founders building out of just fear and obligation. They're like, well, I've managed to get to this point. Now I just have to keep doing this because now it's at least paying the bills or whatever it is, whatever the thing that like maintenance will keep you some level of safe. Right. I think if you ask most of those, if you took the obligation out of it, the obligation to grind against this thing, would you still do this? Right. And I feel like in a lot of cases, the answer would have been no. Like if I didn't feel obliged to grind towards the end of the agency, I would have stopped because I was not enjoying it. I wasn't building anything meaningful anymore. And I just didn't really care about the business. And it sounds bad, but you've said the same thing before. I didn't really care about the clients. Well, not in the same way that I care about some of the folks that you and I know within startups.com, where like I legitimately care what happens to these people. Like I want to know, and I want you to feel good about it. But I think, if you can't say, if I take the obligation out of this, would I still grind in the same way? You're probably building something you're going to resent at some point.
I agree. And what's interesting is how much of this is from our own making. This is a little bit out there, but bear with me. I picture this version of me, okay? That's Edward Norton in Fight Club, okay? And I've built this person that I live with, being my startup. That's Tyler Durden, right?
Yeah.
It's constantly pushing me to get my ass
Goading
kicked,
you on to do things. Yep.
right?
Yep.
And at the end of the movie, I realize he's me,
Yeah.
right? Like it wasn't actually a person. I was the
Me.
one who created all that.
Yep.
And I think that's part of what this is we can wake up tomorrow and we can have the version of our startup company where we've got a happy relationship, a non-abusive, or we can continue to create this Fight Club, Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt, archetype that will constantly kick our ass and have us feel like we're a victim of this thing. The difference in the two is us, right? The difference of the two is our ability to wake up tomorrow and say, to hell with this, right? I'm not going to live like this. I'm not going to create this thing that was supposed to be beautiful but becomes abusive and let that beat me. The only way I'm ever going to be able to get out of this trap is to wake up tomorrow and do it differently.
Overthinking your startup because you're going it alone? You don't have to, and honestly, you shouldn't, because instead, you can learn directly from peers who've been in your shoes. Connect with bootstrapped founders and the advisors helping them win in the Startups.com community. Check out the Startups.com community at www.startups.com to see if it's for you. Could be just the thing you need. I hope to see you inside.